Amidst the insults, buried secrets, and an unrelenting battle to reclaim herself, Emma faces the ultimate question. Can she truly escape the ghosts of her past, or has fate already destined her to be a victim of her own family? Hi everyone, welcome to Revenge Echo. Let's get started. The stares followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, at the gym, even in line at the bank. Some people pretended not to recognize me, averting their eyes as if my existence was an inconvenience. Others gawked openly, whispering to their friends, their faces twisted in judgment. I had gotten used to it, or so I thought. Slut, a voice muttered under their breath as I walked past the fresh produce aisle. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. That was the rule. If you reacted, they won. I gripped my shopping basket tighter and kept moving. I had spent years in the adult film industry. It wasn't something I fell into accidentally. I chose it. It was empowering, at least in the beginning. I made my own money, controlled my own image, and, most importantly, I wasn't ashamed of my body. But that didn't mean society saw it the same way. My stage name was Jade Monroe. But to my neighbors, my old classmates, even some of my so-called friends, I was just that porn star. And they despised me for it. I wasn't always Jade Monroe. Before I was a name on the internet, before I was a fantasy in someone's search history, I was just Emma Calloway. A small-town girl from Illinois with a strict Catholic upbringing and a dream of escaping to somewhere bigger. My family never forgave me. The day my father found out, he didn't say a word. He simply walked to the kitchen, poured himself a whiskey, and sat at the table for hours, staring into space. My mother? She cried. But it wasn't just sadness, it was something deeper, something uglier. Disgust. They told me I was no longer welcome at home. That I had disgraced the family. I was 19. Alone. And for the first time, I realized that the world wasn't as open-minded as I had once believed. But I was stubborn. I didn't quit. I made a name for myself, built a career, and yes, I made a lot of money. More than my parents had ever dreamed of. But money couldn't buy acceptance. Even now, years later, the past refused to die. Every relationship I ever had ended the same way. At first, they were fascinated, intrigued, even. Men loved the idea of dating a porn star. It fed their ego. But that excitement never lasted. Sooner or later, the insecurities crept in. Do you compare me to them? Do you even enjoy it, or is it just work? And, the worst one, how many men have you been with? As if my worth could be reduced to a number. I had tried dating outside the industry, but that never worked either. They wanted the fantasy, but they couldn't handle the reality. And so, I stopped trying. But loneliness is a heavy thing to carry, even for someone who is used to being strong. One evening, after a particularly brutal encounter with an ex-friend at a coffee shop, someone who made sure to remind me how low I had fallen, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I Googled myself. There I was. My name. My videos. Hundreds of forums discussing me, analyzing every part of me as if I wasn't even human. People arguing about whether I was ruined, or if I still had value. I slammed my laptop shut. This was my life. And I wasn't sure if I could keep living it. I didn't leave my apartment for 2 days after that. I told myself it was just a break, a chance to reset, to gather my thoughts. But the truth was, I was exhausted. Tired of the stares, the whispers, the unspoken judgment that followed me like a shadow. On the third day, my phone rang. I almost ignored it, expecting another call from a reporter or some old high school acquaintance pretending to check in, only to ask intrusive questions. But when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach clenched. I hesitated before answering. Nina had been in the industry longer than me, a veteran of sorts. We weren't exactly close, but we had always respected each other. While I had tried to keep my private life separate, Nina had fully embraced it. She had a podcast, social media accounts, and even a book deal about her experiences in the industry. Emma, she said, skipping the pleasantries. Are you okay? The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I'm fine, I lied. Bullshit. I exhaled, rubbing my temples. I don't know. I Googled myself the other night. Probably the dumbest thing I've done in years. A low chuckle came through the speaker. Yeah, that's a rookie mistake. I stayed silent. Nina sighed. Look, I know what you're going through. I've been there. The world loves to consume us, but hates to acknowledge we're real people. But you can't let them break you. I bit my lip. Easy for you to say. You have thick skin. I didn't always. She paused. Listen, there's something happening this weekend, a charity event in LA. Some of us are going. It's for sex worker rights, but mostly, it's just a place to be around people who get it. No cameras, no judgment. You should come. I hesitated. Going out, facing people, putting myself in a space where I couldn't hide, it sounded terrifying. But at the same time, the loneliness was suffocating. Okay, I said before I could change my mind. I'll go. The event was held at a private venue, a rooftop overlooking the glittering Los Angeles skyline. I arrived wearing a sleek black dress, my makeup flawless, my posture composed. I had spent years perfecting this armor, the ability to walk into any room and own it, even when I wanted to disappear. Inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly warm. There were people from all walks of life, some still in the industry, others who had moved on, and even a few activists and lawyers who fought for our rights. Nina, a woman with platinum blonde hair and a confident smirk, embraced my friend. Then her eyes landed on me. And this must be the Jade Monroe. I stiffened. I was so used to hearing my name laced with disdain that it took me a second to realize there was no malice in her voice. She's a legend, Nina said with a grin. Emma, this is Carmen. Carmen extended a hand. It's nice to finally meet you. It was strange, being somewhere I wasn't the villain in someone else's story. As the night went on, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lighten. I laughed, I drank, I listened to stories from others who had walked the same path as me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. But just as I was beginning to let my guard down, reality reminded me it was never far behind. A man in a suit approached our table, his eyes scanning me with something unreadable. Jade Monroe, he said smoothly. I frowned. Do I know you? No, he admitted. But I know you. And just like that, the night took a turn. The man's presence sent a ripple of unease through me. There was something about the way he stood, confident, expectant, like he was waiting for a reaction. I had met enough men like him to recognize the type. I set down my drink, keeping my voice steady. If you know me, then you also know I don't do personal meetups. He smirked, slipping his hands into his pockets. Relax, I'm not here for that. I'm here because we have unfinished business. My stomach tightened. I had been in this industry long enough to know that the past never stayed buried. But no matter how many times it happened, it always felt like a punch to the gut. Who are you? I asked. His smirk deepened. You don't remember? That's disappointing. I searched his face, but nothing clicked. He was tall, well-dressed, maybe mid-40s. Something in his gaze felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Nina stepped beside me, her tone sharp. If you have something to say, say it. Otherwise, move along. He barely glanced at her. His attention was locked on me. My name is David Calloway. The world around me blurred. I barely heard Nina's confused, "Wait, Calloway," before the realization slammed into me. David Calloway. My cousin. I hadn't seen him in over a decade, not since I was disowned. What the hell are you doing here? My voice was low, but the anger beneath it was palpable. David chuckled, shaking his head. Still the same, huh? No. How have you been? Or, nice to see you. I gritted my teeth. What do you want? His expression darkened. I need you to come home. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Home? That's funny. Last I checked, I didn't have one. You do, he said. Whether you like it or not. And right now, Dad is dying. I felt the words before I truly heard them. A heavy, suffocating weight pressing against my chest. My uncle, my father's brother. The only one in my family who had ever been kind to me. The man who had snuck me money when I first left home, who had called me once in secret just to hear my voice. A storm of emotions crashed inside me. Anger, pain, guilt. And beneath it all, the terrifying pull of something I thought I had buried long ago. Obligation. I shook my head. I can't. David's eyes burned with something fierce. Yes, you can. And you will. And then he left, his words lingering in the air like a curse. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the address David had slipped into my purse. Nina had spent the entire ride home trying to talk me out of it. They don't deserve you, she had said. Not after what they did. And she was right. But the problem with family, the real, deep problem, is that no matter how much they hurt you, some part of you still aches for their approval. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what would happen if I went back. I would be a spectacle. A walking scandal. They wouldn't see me as a daughter, a niece, or a cousin. They would see me as Jade Monroe. A reminder of everything they despised. And yet, I had to see him. I had to see my uncle before it was too late. So, against my better judgment, I packed my bags and booked a flight home. To a place that no longer wanted me. The airport smelled the same, coffee, perfume, and the sterile chill of air conditioning. I had barely stepped off the plane when I felt it. The weight of coming back. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something heavier, something suffocating. Like the past was reaching out, curling its fingers around my throat. I kept my sunglasses on as I walked through the terminal, gripping my small suitcase a little too tightly. No one recognized me. Not yet. But I still felt exposed, as if the walls of this place carried the whispers of people who had once known me. David was waiting near the exit. Emma. I flinched at the sound of my real name. It had been years since anyone in my family called me that. In the industry, I was Jade Monroe. Online, I was a brand. But here, I was just the girl who had disappointed them all. David's expression was unreadable as he led me to his car. The ride was mostly silent. I had expected some kind of lecture, some snide remark about how I had shamed the family or ruined my reputation, but David was uncharacteristically quiet. It wasn't until we pulled up to the house that the real discomfort set in. The Calloway estate was just as I remembered, massive, elegant, a picture-perfect display of old money and tradition. The iron gates, the perfectly manicured hedges, the towering columns at the entrance. I had once belonged here. Now, I felt like an intruder. David killed the engine and turned to me. Before we go in, you should know Mom's not thrilled you're here. I scoffed. Shocking. She's been under a lot of stress, he continued, as if that excused everything. Dad's been getting worse and the whole town knows you're coming back. I clenched my jaw. Of course they did. That was the thing about growing up in a place like this. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business. Where the Calloways weren't just a family, but the family. Respected. Proper. Untouchable. Until I ruined everything. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding. The front door loomed ahead, and for a moment I considered turning around. Getting back in the car, booking a flight, disappearing again. But then I thought of my uncle. And I forced myself forward. The house was exactly as I remembered. Grand chandeliers, marble floors, expensive art. A place where everything was curated, where emotions were kept hidden behind polite smiles and hushed conversations. A maid led me to the living room. And that's when I saw her. My mother. She sat on the pristine white sofa, stiff and poised, her sharp blue eyes locking onto me the second I entered the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I had pictured this moment so many times, had imagined a dozen different versions of how it would go. But nothing prepared me for the actual weight of standing in front of her again. She was older now. The lines around her mouth were deeper, her hair dyed a shade too dark, but everything else was the same. Cold. Immaculate. She set down her teacup with an audible clink. I see you still dressed like an actress, she said, her voice as smooth as ever. I smiled thinly. And I see you still greet your daughter like a disappointment. Her lips pressed into a line. You shouldn't have come. I shrugged, feigning indifference. David seemed to think otherwise. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. David should know better. A bead of silence stretched between us. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Maybe some reluctant acceptance, maybe even a little regret. But no, this was my mother. And my mother did not bend. You being here, she continued, will only make things worse. Worse for who? I challenged. For all of us. I scoffed. Right. Because I'm the family's biggest scandal. Her gaze sharpened. You abandoned us. I laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. I was abandoned. The second you found out what I did, you cut me off. You let the world tear me apart while you pretended I never existed. For the first time, something flickered in her expression. A crack in the armor. But it was gone as quickly as it came. She stood up, smoothing the creases of her dress. Your uncle is upstairs. If you're going to see him, do it quickly. Then leave. She turned away before I could respond. And just like that, she was gone. I let out a slow breath, my hands trembling. I had known this would happen. Had known she wouldn't welcome me with open arms. And yet, it still hurt. But I hadn't come back for her. I had come back for him. So I squared my shoulders and walked up the stairs, toward the only person in this house who had ever truly loved me. The hallway leading to my uncle's room felt longer than I remembered. I hesitated outside his door, my fingers hovering over the handle. For so many years, this house had been filled with people, with voices, with carefully maintained perfection. Now it felt hollow. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The scent of medicine hit me first, sterile, sharp, a reminder of how much had changed. The curtains were drawn, casting a dim light over the room. And there, propped up against a mountain of pillows, was Uncle Henry. His once broad frame had thinned, his face lined with exhaustion. But when his eyes landed on me, they lit up with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Warmth. Emma, he murmured, his voice raspy but full of emotion. I swallowed hard and stepped inside, forcing a smile. Hey, Uncle Henry. He reached out a trembling hand, and I rushed to take it. His grip was weaker than I remembered, but it still felt like home. They told me you wouldn't come, he said, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. But I knew better. I bit my lip, my throat tightening. Of course I came. You're the only one who ever gave a damn about me. A sad smile crossed his face. That's not true. I laughed, shaking my head. Oh, it is. The second I left, they erased me. Mom, Dad, the whole damn town. Henry sighed. Your mother. She doesn't know how to love properly. I stiffened. That's an understatement. He squeezed my hand gently. But that doesn't mean she didn't feel it. I looked away, blinking back the sting behind my eyes. I wanted to believe that. But years of silence, of cruel words and turned backs, had hardened me against the idea. She wants me gone, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She won't even look at me. And Dad. I stopped. I didn't know what my father thought. He hadn't spoken to me in years. Henry sighed, shifting slightly in bed. Your father, he's struggling. I let out a bitter chuckle. He's struggling? I wonder how he thinks I felt when my own parents acted like I didn't exist. Henry gave me a knowing look. And yet, you're here. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I hated how well he knew me. I came back for you, I admitted. His smile was soft but knowing. You came back because, deep down, you still love them. Even when they don't deserve it. I shook my head. I don't know if I do. Henry didn't push. He simply squeezed my hand again, his touch grounding me in a way nothing else had. I don't have much time left, he said finally. And I won't pretend that I can fix this family before I go. My heart clenched. Don't talk like that. It's the truth. His voice was gentle but firm. But before I go, I need you to promise me something. I frowned. What? His eyes locked onto mine, filled with a quiet kind of urgency. Don't let this place break you. I sucked in a sharp breath. You are not your past, he continued. And you are not their shame. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Then why do I feel like I am? Henry sighed, his own eyes glassy. Because they need you to be. It makes it easier for them to ignore their own mistakes. I gritted my teeth, my emotions churning like a storm. All my life, I had fought to prove I didn't need their approval. And yet, standing here, hearing these words from the only person who had ever truly loved me, I felt something crack inside me. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against his hand. I missed you. His fingers brushed through my hair, the way they used to when I was a kid. I missed you too, sweetheart. I left my uncle's room feeling raw, like a wound left open to the cold air. I needed a moment. Some fresh air. Something to steady me. But as I made my way down the stairs, I heard voices. Raised voices. My mother. And David. I slowed my steps, pausing just before the grand staircase. She should leave, my mother hissed. David's voice was low but firm. She's here for Uncle Henry. She's here for attention, she snapped. Do you know how many calls I've already received? The Calloway girl, our disgrace, returning home like she belongs here. I felt my stomach twist. She does belong here, David shot back. There was a pause. And then my mother's voice, quieter but no less sharp. She lost that right when she chose to disgrace herself. And this family. Something inside me snapped. I stepped into the room. They both froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then I smiled coldly. You don't have to worry, Mom. I'll be gone soon enough. David looked like he wanted to say something, but I turned on my heel, heading toward the front door. But my mother wasn't done. You think you can just waltz back in here? She called after me. That we're supposed to forgive you? That you can undo everything you've done? I spun around, my blood boiling. Undo what, exactly? Living my life? Making my own choices? Or is it the fact that I stopped being your perfect little puppet? Her eyes flashed. You humiliated us. No, I seethed. I humiliated you. Silence. The air between us crackled with unspoken words, with years of resentment and hurt. Then she took a slow step forward, her face cold as ice. You will never be part of this family again. It shouldn't have hurt. But it did. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my head high. Don't worry, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. I wouldn't want to be. Then I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back. But as I stepped into the cool night air, I realized something. I wasn't just walking away from her. I was walking away from the girl I used to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. The night air was sharp against my skin as I walked away from the house that had once been my entire world. My heart pounded, not just from anger, but from something deeper, something primal. This wasn't just pain anymore. This was war. For years, I had tried to outrun my past, to pretend that what they thought of me didn't matter. But now, standing on the edge of the driveway, staring back at the cold mansion behind me, I realized something. I didn't want their approval. I didn't need their forgiveness. I wanted justice. I wanted them to feel even a fraction of the humiliation, the rejection, the loneliness that they had forced onto me. And I knew exactly where to start. The first step to tearing down a family like mine was simple. Find their secrets. Because if there was one thing I knew about my parents, it was that their pristine reputation was built on lies. I drove to the one place that had always held more truth than anywhere else in town, the Rustwood Bar. It was a seedy little place on the outskirts, the kind of bar where secrets slipped through the cracks like spilled whiskey. I hadn't been here in years, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of old ghosts settling onto my shoulders. I found exactly who I was looking for sitting in the corner, nursing a cheap beer. Marcus Calloway. My father's brother. The real disgrace of the family. A man they had buried so deep in shame that most people in town forgot he even existed. But I hadn't. I slid into the booth across from him. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his face weathered from years of hard living. Well, look who's back from the dead. I smirked. You always did have a way with words. He took a slow sip of his beer. What do you want, Emma? I leaned in, keeping my voice low. I want to know the truth about my family. He let out a dry laugh. That's a dangerous thing to go looking for. I met his gaze head-on. Good. I hope it is. His smirk faltered. For the first time in my life, I saw something flicker behind his eyes, respect. Marcus sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. All right, kid. You want the truth? I hope you're ready for it, because once you start down this path, there's no coming back. I smiled. I don't want to come back. Marcus downed the rest of his beer, his fingers drumming against the wooden table. The bar smelled of old leather and regret, but I didn't care. I was closer to the truth than I had ever been. You want to know about your father? He muttered, glancing around as if the walls had ears. That man spent his whole life pretending he was better than everyone. But let me tell you something, Emma, he's dirtier than you could ever imagine. I leaned forward. Tell me everything. Marcus smirked. Let's start with the money. That night, I learned more about my father than I ever wanted to know. The respectable businessman, the beloved community leader. He was a fraud. His empire wasn't built on hard work, but on bribes, backroom deals, and the kind of corruption that could destroy him if the right people found out. Worse than that, he had enemies. Dangerous ones. People who would love nothing more than to see him fall. And I was going to help them do it. I didn't waste time. The next morning, I made my first move. A small, anonymous tip to an investigative journalist about my father's unexplained financial gains. A few whispers to the wrong people at the country club. It was like striking a match in a dry forest. Within days, rumors began to swirl. My mother, always obsessed with appearances, called me in a panic. Emma, what did you do? I smiled against the phone. Oh, Mother. I haven't even started. She sucked in a sharp breath. You ungrateful. I hung up before she could finish. This was just the beginning. At the same time, I focused on something even more important, myself. For years, I had let the world define me. I had let their disgust, their judgment, control my life. Not anymore. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had stood by me before my family's influence poisoned them against me. I found a therapist, someone who helped me unpack the years of shame I had buried. And most of all, I started rebuilding. Not just to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. Then came the final blow. My father was arrested. Fraud. Tax evasion. A dozen other charges that made headlines for weeks. His perfect image was shattered. My mother, humiliated, fled to Europe, trying to outrun the scandal. My brother, always spineless, refused to speak to me. And I walked into that courtroom the day my father was sentenced, sat in the front row, and met his gaze without an ounce of fear. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he was led away in handcuffs. For the first time in my life, I saw him for what he truly was. A coward, a fraud, and nothing more. As I stepped outside, the sun warmed my skin. For the first time in years, I felt free. The town would never forget what I was. Some people would always despise me. But I no longer cared. Because I knew the truth now. I wasn't the disgrace of the family. I was the only one who had ever been honest. And that was enough. The courthouse steps felt endless as I walked down them, the weight of my father's downfall still settling in my bones. I had won. So why did it feel like the war had just begun? My name was back in the headlines, but not just as the daughter of a disgraced businessman. The media dug up everything about me. My past. My career. The scandal that had torn my family apart. I wasn't just a woman who had exposed a corrupt empire. I was still, to many, a porn star. And they hated that I had the audacity to take power into my own hands. The threats came first. Anonymous emails. Messages sent to my old accounts. Some were nothing more than slurs and insults. Others were darker. I know where you live. You think you're safe? Your past will always own you. At first, I ignored them. This was nothing new. I had spent years being called every name in the book. But then I noticed the car. A sleek black sedan parked across the street from my apartment. Never the same person inside. Never moving unless I did. I wasn't just being watched. Someone was hunting me. I wasn't stupid. I knew when I had poked the wrong bear. And my father? He wasn't the only dangerous man in my family. There was someone else. My uncle, not Marcus, but the other one. The one my family never spoke about. Victor Holloway. A man who had built his own empire in the shadows. Not with fake charity events and business deals, but with something far worse. Drugs. Trafficking. violence. And if he thought I was a threat to what he had built, I knew exactly how this would end. I had exposed one Holloway, but this time, I was the one being hunted. One night, I came home to find my apartment door open. My stomach clenched. I reached into my purse, my fingers wrapping around the pepper spray I had started carrying. Slowly, I pushed the door open wider. Nothing looked out of place. The lights were off. The air was still. But then I saw it. A single envelope on my kitchen table. My name scrawled across the front in red ink. I swallowed hard and picked it up. Inside was a single photograph. Of me. Taken that morning. At my usual coffee shop. The message on the back was simple. Leave town. Or you won't get another warning. I clenched my jaw, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had destroyed my father. But my family's demons weren't done with me yet. I stood there, gripping the photograph, my breath shallow. The message was clear. This wasn't a warning, it was a promise. I had spent so much of my life fighting. Fighting my family, fighting society, fighting to be seen as more than the label they had given me. But this wasn't a fight I could win. Victor wasn't like my father. He didn't play by the rules. And if I stayed, I wouldn't just be hunted. I would disappear. That night, I packed a single bag. Clothes. Cash. A fake ID Marcus had once given me, just in case. I didn't think I would ever use it, but now? Now, it was my ticket to freedom. I left everything else behind. The apartment. The life I had tried so hard to rebuild. Even my phone, I dropped it into a storm drain as I walked away, watching as the last piece of my old life vanished into the dark. I didn't leave a note. I didn't say goodbye. By the time the sun rose, I was already gone. Somewhere far from home, in a small town where no one knew me, I watched the waves crash against the shore. I had no past here, no name that carried weight. I was free, but freedom came with a price. I had no closure, no final confrontation. My father was in prison, my mother had disappeared, and Victor still ruled from the shadows. Would he ever stop looking for me? Maybe not. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Because I had finally done the one thing no one ever let me do. I chose myself. And that was enough. At its heart, People Despise Me Because I Am a Porn Star is about breaking free from the labels society imposes, from the past that haunts us, and from the expectations of those who claim to know us best. Emma's journey is not just one of survival, but of self-liberation. She learns that true strength isn't about proving others wrong. It's about choosing herself, even when the world refuses to accept her. This story challenges the idea of redemption. Does society ever truly forgive? Can someone ever escape the shadows of their past? Or is freedom something we must take for ourselves, even if it means leaving everything behind?